Welcome back to the Unwritten Rule. Mizzou football is looking to go 3-0. I couldn't really even get that out super seriously because it's going to be a tough matchup on Saturday. We're going to preview Mizzou, Kansas State on this program on this Fair Friday. 11 a.m. kicks are back, first of all. That's always delightful. Not really, but yeah, Mizzou, Kansas State on Saturday, 11 a.m. It is in Columbia. Obviously, the Tigers lost in the pouring rain. Poor Kenny, who was covering the team, had to go wait. There was a delay, right? Didn't it get delayed for a while?
There was a lightning delay is what the issue
Lightning
was.
delay. Yeah.
But I mean, I just sat in a press box the whole time.
Oh, yeah,
It was
you were
pretty cold.
dry.
I will admit it was freezing in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
They don't
sorry.
have heaters at Kansas State.
Yeah. So we're back 11 a.m. The Tigers obviously got kind of blown out by Kansas State last year. And I think the three of us, safe to say, are kind of expecting that again, given the performance, especially in week 2 against Middle Tennessee State. But I'll throw it to you guys first. Mizzou, what's happened this week? What are we looking for? I think they know the opponent that they're getting on Friday. Drinkwitz hasn't been shy to say this team is really freaking good. They're ranked for a reason. They were great last year. What has Mizzou done this week? What are you guys looking for them to have a fighting chance on Saturday?
They're gonna this week. I think everybody in the building kind of knows how important this one is. Brady Cook really kind of took the reins and talked about how much this team wanted this one on Saturday night. But needless to say, I mean, if we're basing it just off of the performances of two teams right now, they're a ways off, and Mizzou is going to have to play their all-around best game on Saturday to maybe win. It may not even be enough. This K-State team is really good still. Mizzou is going to have to be a lot more explosive on offense. Have to negate the penalties. Special teams, everything has to be cleaned up. You can't have bad kick returns. Can't have missed extra points, missed kicks, bad holds, and all that. And the defense, I think, does need to maybe find another gear. Maybe they've played well the first 2 weeks, but they haven't forced a turnover, and I think it's going to take a couple turnovers maybe for Mizzou to win this game.
I've been thinking about it a lot. You said that well, Peyton. You're trying to see a little bit more explosive plays. We talked about chaos, explosion, things that just set the tone, or especially early in the game. We talked about that last week. With the last 2 losses, of course, wins are wins. You're trying to extend your season. You're trying to get to postseason play. Even if that's not an SEC championship, you want to get to a bowl game. You want exposure. You want this team to get better each year. You look at last year, Louisiana Tech. It was a decent win. It was a fine win, 52-24. You come into week 2, and that's when Kansas State kind of rolls you. You had a kind of a win against Abilene Christian that you expected a little bit more, and then it was just a heartbreaking loss against Auburn. I mean, that's just uncharacteristic plays, from special teams, and then Nate Peat extending the ball. And so it was kind of some rough, first 4 weeks. Good response against Georgia. I mean, that's where I'm kind of looking right now. I know it's only week 3, and that was week 5 last year. I think Mizzou, we can look at, how they played the last 2 weeks. I think maybe we might be, pretty harsh on them. And, I mean, there are points to blame. There are reasons to be, thinking that way. But, more I think about it, maybe there is, more fight in this team, especially after losing last season. These guys on this team, they didn't grow up. A lot of them didn't grow up a part of this regional rivalry. I mean, Brady Cook might be one of the only ones, but really the teams he watched, especially in the SEC. But this is, a game that matters to a lot of, just Missouri in general. I think maybe Mizzou comes out of this. There's a lot on the table. Maybe they don't sneak out with a win, but maybe they keep it close. I think there are definitely weapons here on the offense and defense that could, point in that direction.
It's a thing we all do in football, especially when you only play one game a week. Everyone's kind of wired to overanalyze the last game because that's all you really have to go on. And Mizzou's last game was not good, obviously, and so I think it's a fair point, Kenny. Maybe we're being a little bit too harsh on the chances that this Missouri team has. That's not to try and understate what Kansas State can do. But yeah, I think that's a good point. I want to look at the offensive line. Either one of you can take this because there are some shifts. At least Drinkwitz said they were going to look this week in practice at switching some things up because it was not great from anybody. We talked about that after Middle Tennessee. It wasn't good by anybody on the offensive line. What if any changes could we maybe expect or that you would hope to to see, in addition to obviously the thing we're all going to keep screaming for, which is the penalties, lack of penalties or less of them. But what else can we see?
Drinkwitz said this was probably the most important tidbit they got out of Drinkwitz this week. It was that Drinkwitz was looking at the right guard, creating competition, as he put it, at right guard. He said Cameron Johnson would be there. He said Marcellus Johnson would get a look. He said EJ Doma-Ogar, who we've talked about this show a lot on this show a lot. And interesting, this was the real interesting one. He said Logan Reichert, the freshman, the huge freshman from the Kansas City area, would also get a look at the right guard position. That's the only one I would expect really any sort of change in starter at, if there is one. I would still lean EJ Ndoma-Ogar as being the guy that goes there. But regardless, everybody needs to have a better week on the O-line. Javon Foster didn't have his best game last week, but I would expect that to change. He's just a rock solid tackle. I still expect Armand Membu to be kind of a good, solid piece at right tackle. Connor Tollison, Delgado, I think they'll be fine. It was a bad week last week. I still ultimately think this O-line will turn out better than it was last year. It's just a matter of actually putting it together.
Yeah, you said it well there, and it's interesting to see where that competition comes. So EJ Ndoma-Ogar really opened that competition last year. First 2 games of the season, he was on the depth chart, fell off after kind of some rough play against Abilene Christian late into the game, then fought his way back on. I mean, EJ Ndoma-Ogar, we've seen it. He's proven it that he can fight for these positions. He can get options there. I wanted to throw one little small note about the defensive side of the ball. Just one quick update. This comes from Callum McAndrew. Chad Bailey, who was in uniform last week, still not back on the depth chart, but he does have a quote from Drinkwitz here. If he's ready, we'll see if he can give us a couple of series, and also mention that they'll never put him in jeopardy, but the Mike linebacker is ahead of schedule to return. Of course, we know he had the soft tissues procedure, but he looks like he's coming back soon. And this is like one of those things you've seen before from Drinkwitz and company, is that these captains, Barrett Bannister last season going into the Arkansas game, did have that knee injury, but he was suited up. He was, going through the motions, but never played. And, it's maybe like a game time decision, but also having one of your captains in uniform is always a good thing too. I mean, he's right there. Even if he's not on the field, he can be almost like a secondary coach especially for some of those younger linebackers that be filling in for Chad Bailey.
I want to stick on the defense for a second, because I think there's another thing a theme we've caught on to is, through the first 2 games, this is a defense that's gotten a lot of hype from a lot of people outside of Mizzou circles, like national people, in terms of how strong it can be. Under Blake Baker. This is a defense that doesn't have a turnover yet against South Dakota and Middle Tennessee. Is that another thing you two are looking for them to kind of capitalize on? I know it's a much better opponent, but forcing a turnover, I think, would seem to appease a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, last year it wasn't like they were some dominant turnover machine defense. They forced 18, which if I remember correctly, seeing the stat, it was around 70th, very middle of the pack at it. But you do, against a team like Kansas State, you're going to need probably to create a couple of turnovers. And turnovers, there is always a bit of randomness to it. I think that is just what it comes down to a lot of the time, whether a fumble bounces your way, whether you're in the right position on a bad throw. That is not a lot that Mizzou can control on defense. But at the same time, there are things you can do to increase your chances there. And I think they have to come away with a couple this weekend. And
sounds like we need yeah.
I was just going to say, not creating any through 2 weeks, that's pretty unlucky. I would expect something this weekend.
We need a Will Howard, Josh Allen from Monday Night moment where he just runs into his own guy and can't catch a snap, is what it sounds like.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's almost just an appeasing thing for fans, because like you said, it is a little random. It can be a little, a little weird in terms of how often you cause it. But yeah, it's a little worrisome that in those performances, which we were not pleased with, the defense, wasn't creating some sort of takeaway. Kenny, you have anything on the defense? What you want from them?
No, I think Peyton said it well earlier as well. Just looking for that first turnover of the season, and we talk so highly about Blake Baker. Still haven't heard from the coordinators yet this year.
Yeah.
We did hear some shouts about play calling from Kirby and how a lot of the offensive staff is giving input, which we heard the same thing last year. One last thing that I want to mention about the Mizzou side is another quote from Drinkwitz saying we have to get Nate Peat more involved. You look at where Nate Peat has been this season. Last game, nearly 75% or more of the times he was on the field, he got the ball. I mean, we're not seeing him really used in a lot of different scenarios. He had 8 attempts last game against Middle Tennessee for 51 yards. He has 103 yards on the season on 22 attempts. That's pretty good. I mean, 1 touchdown, his longest run is for 15 yards. You compare that to last year, he has nearly a fourth of the rushing yards he had last year. We're seeing a different Nate Peat, more confident. He looks like he's having fun out there as well. That receiving touchdown, I mean, that's a great thing to see from him as well. And he looks like a refreshed player, almost a different player.
Yeah. Mizzou's been so reliant on, you went from Larry Roundtree to Tyler Beatty having that, elite-ish running back to rely on all the time. And now you have kind of more of a tandem, but it's 2 guys that can get the job done. So it is nice to see Nate Peat back. I think that's a good take. Let's turn now to Kansas State. The opponents, of course, on Saturday. This is a good team. Fellas. 2 games so far. They beat SEMO, of course, sometimes an opponent of Missouri, at least in our time. They played SEMO a couple times. 45-0, beat Troy 42-13. So also haven't really faced anybody, too significant just yet, but I think have shown why they deserve to be ranked 15th and they are in the country. This is a good team. They went to the Big 12 championship. They beat TCU in that game. Of course, it went to the college football playoff. What are you guys looking at in Kansas State? Who are the threats, I guess I should say, to Mizzou's chances on Saturday?
Yeah, we've talked about him already a bit. One guy I would keep an eye on is definitely Will Howard, Kansas State's quarterback. Last year, he was not the quarterback for Kansas State when Missouri played them. It was Adrian Martinez, and Adrian Martinez gave the Mizzou defense fits a lot of the game. They really struggled to contain his legs. Will Howard, a bit of a different type of quarterback. He doesn't run around like Adrian Martinez does, but he does have that in his back pocket if he needs. Will Howard, he has 3 rushing touchdowns already, and yes, you can maybe look at the opponents and say, well, it's not that impressive, but I mean, you pair that with 5 touchdowns through the air already, and Troy was no slouch on defense last year. They were one of the best defenses in the country. Yes, it was a weaker conference, but it is something to keep in mind. Will Howard was the quarterback that led Kansas State to that Big 12 title win. He took over late in the year for Adrian Martinez after Martinez was hurt and just ran with the job. He started for them in the Sugar Bowl. I would definitely keep an eye on him. He has 547 yards through the air, 5 touchdowns, 2 picks. So there is a little bit of a turnover prone element to him. He's thrown a pick in each of the first 2 games. He's definitely going to be – he might be the X factor on this K-State offense. If Missouri can keep him bottled up, they're going to have a much better chance.
Funny you mentioned those interceptions. I remember last year I got an email while on the beat from like a Mizzou fan. I mean, someone that was really following that team closely, and they were talking to Adrian Martinez, and Adrian Martinez up to that point was averaging a turnover per game, and I don't think he threw an interception in that game against Mizzou. He just went 9 for 20 for 101 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. And I just thought that was funny, just kind of remembering that as well. But when you look back at that last game last year, another guy that just really came to mind, who's now in the NFL with the Kansas City Chiefs, is Felix Ozuma, who was just a threat on the edge.
Missouri native.
Missouri native, had an opportunity to go to Mizzou as a journalist student, not even to play football. What a story for him. First round pick by the Kansas City Chiefs. Another guy, Eli Huggins, who ran out of college eligibility. He was at the defensive tackle position. How are you going to replace that? Khalid Duke, who's been mentioned from the Mizzou staff, who's been mentioned by everyone at Kansas State as well. And here's a quote that I want you guys to hear. This is from K-State football coach Chris Kleeman. This is from an article at kansas.com. He's a terror. He's a good player. We're keeping him fresh too. Duke is just so difficult to try and block. I mean, after you lose one of the best edge rushers in the country to the NFL, another guy comes in named Khalid Duke. I mean, that's something to keep an eye on. How are these tackles? How are these guards going to stop him? That's one thing to monitor. Who's going to be coming off that edge? Khalid Duke is the name to look out for.
5 tackles, 3 sacks already this season. He leads the Big 12 right now. So good name for sure. The only other thing I'll turn to, another guy in the NFL now, of course, believe with the Cowboys, right? Deuce Vaughn, the running back out of Kansas State was obviously a terror to a lot of teams last season. He's gone. So, a hole to fill for Kansas State at running back. The guy they are turning to, it looks like this year, is DJ Giddens. Already has 180 rushing yards this season, had around 500 last year, which for also a team that had Adrian Martinez who liked to run it, it's a decent haul. So, he's obviously he's stepping into a bigger role, but maybe not as strong of a run game this season from Kansas State when they play Mizzou, because they don't have Deuce Vaughn anymore. But obviously Giddens seems like he's making that step up. But that's one thing I'll shout out in terms of talent they lost.
Yeah, Giddens has 180 yards through 2 games. It's kind of been a little bit of a dual threat out of that backfield. They also have Trayshawn Ward, who has the same amount of carries but has 114 yards and just 1 touchdown. Just 1 touchdown between both of those running backs. So Will Howard actually has triple their rushing touchdowns. But, I mean, I wouldn't expect that trend to continue against Missouri. But, yeah, I mean, Deuce Vaughn, Mizzou was able to keep him relatively bottled up for about a half. But, I mean, in that second half, when things just really went sideways, you had those back-to-back interceptions from Cook and Abraham. They just got ran over. And, I mean, Kansas State in general just has a lot of playmakers this year. You also have to consider RJ Garcia and Phillip Brooks out wide. They have 4 different receivers with over 100 yards receiving already. So they spread the ball around. It is a dangerous offense. So you're not going to really see anything come from just one direction. You have to be ready for everything.
It's a Josh Manning Bowl. That's what it is.
Oh, yeah. Good
Kansas
point.
State fans were very normal after that commitment.
I'm looking at the weather report too, Kenny. 79 degrees and sunny. So I don't think we have any lightning delays to worry about this time around.
Lucky
thankfully.
Fans in Columbia this weekend.
Yeah. They're getting a nice 11 a.m. kickoff. They'll obviously be up early. Any last things on Kansas State? I'll do the kicker shout out just because kicker expert. Chris Tannant, 11 for 11 on field goals. He has 1 from 50 plus. I think the rest of them are all extra points. Oh, never mind. He has 11 extra points. 1 made field goal from 50 plus.
I was going to say,
he's only been kicking extra points. Sorry,
Yeah.
I read that wrong. But so there's your kicker report. But yeah, any final Kansas State things to look for? Anything from Mizzou? Maybe you know what? Quick score prediction. We'll end with that. What do we think the damage is going to be on Saturday?
This is definitely, you hate to say it's Missouri's Super Bowl, but this is probably about as important as a game is going to be for Mizzou this year. I mean, Drinkwitz needs this one. He needs it. It's the first sellout at Faroe in 4 years, since 2019, homecoming against Ole Miss. They need this one bad. I think they'll play like they need it bad. Kansas State is just too good, and this team has not shown me that they are capable of really hanging with them. So I'm going to go Kansas State 34, Mizzou 20.
That's good. I've been going back and forth all week. I saw a tweet where it was like 35-24, which seemed like a lot of points. I mean, last year we saw these tweets as well about the score being pretty high, and they were right about Kansas State. They just weren't right about Mizzou. I've been on the side that I think Mizzou's going to put up a big fight. I think after those first 2 games of the season, you have to come out and just, show that you are an SEC caliber team, and you're going to, be able to compete with some of these big dogs. I'm going to say 28-24 Kansas State.
I was thinking kind of along the same lines. I feel like it's almost going to be a little bit more defensive because I do think Mizzou's defense is going to show up. I think they will create a turnover just with how much Kansas State, from what you guys were saying, likes to throw the ball. And Will Howard's solid, but a little bit turnover prone, it would seem, at least early on. I'm going to go 27, one less than Kenny, to 17. 10-point win for the Wildcats in Columbia. Obviously, that's not the outcome Mizzou fans will be looking or be happy about, but I think it's an outcome that a lot of them are going to be expecting going into Saturday. We will see. We're going to jump on. Peyton and I will jump on right after the game to break it all down, recap. It'll be nice. We won't have to do it at the very late hours of the evening because they play early on in the day. So we'll maybe have some college football on in the background while we do that. But we are going to recap, and we'll see. I'm very intrigued. Like Peyton said, this is a big one for Drinkwitz. He needs this. It's a big litmus test for where this team is really at, I think. It's going to be exciting. Nice college football game in Columbia, 11 a.m. All right. We'll see how Mizzou does on Saturday.